Hello and welcome to this week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman. And on this week's episode, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with the world's only forensic 401k consultant. He provides expert advice to protect your people, your employees, your profits, and your peace of mind. Because he specializes in uncovering the hidden fees, conflicts of interest, and unethical practices that are in retirement plans that quietly cost you and your employees thousands of dollars. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Mr. Paul Sippil. Welcome to Season 3 of For the Love of Chiropractic. Season 1 has 60 episodes of practice management tips to help you build the best practice possible. Season 2, 3 keys of my success, 50 interviews with the most successful chiropractors from around the world. Season 3, resources for your success. So let's listen up and learn how to build a great business. So I had the opportunity to catch up with Paul Sippil by phone. Paul, are you there?
I'm here.
It is so good to be chatting with you. Thank you so much for taking the time and making the time to share your knowledge and wisdom, with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be here.
So as we get started, tell me a little bit about how you got into your 401k forensic planning, which I just find is a fascinating topic. You were telling me a little bit in our pre-chat, but for the benefit of the audience, tell them how you got into this field.
Oh, sure. Well, it all started a little over 20 years ago when I had a conversation with one of my colleagues who was always researching and looking up interesting information. And one of the interesting things he told me was how you could actually look up any company's retirement plan tax form online. It was public information. And I was really intrigued by the fact that this was public, and always having had an investigative mind. I knew this was something I wanted to look into, but I didn't know what to do with the information initially. But a few years later, I just started thinking about it a little bit more, and I got a list of companies' tax forms that I was able to extract onto an Excel spreadsheet. There's services that allow you to do this, and take all the information and put it on Excel. So I just started picking up the phone and calling companies whose charges I felt were high or often in many cases egregious. And I thought I would be a hero by providing all this information and people would be extremely grateful. But the responses I got really surprised me. They were mainly, I'm not paying anything, or my friend is taking care of that for me, or both. And those types of responses illustrated a disconnect that was so large between what was perceived to be true and what reality actually was, that I realized I could make an entire career just consulting in this one area. A few months ago, I had a conversation with a business owner. There's 3 people in the company, including him. Most of the money is his. And he did not even know that there were commissions being paid to an advisor from his account to the tune of about $49,000 over a 5-year period from 2019 to 2024. And he didn't even know he had an advisor, which sounds pretty crazy, although this happens on a regular basis. So naturally, he wanted to know who this advisor was. I mean, I would want to know if that much money came out of my account to a person I didn't even know existed. So he had his HR director contact the administrator of the plan just to see if the administrator could tell them who the advisor was. And they did get the name of an advisor who the HR director of the company then Googled, just because, again, she wanted to know who this advisor was too. And what she learned was that the advisor had actually been dead. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's kind of like Chicago voting. You don't necessarily even have to be alive to vote. Well, you don't have to be alive to earn compensation either. And I was having a conversation online with someone else in the industry that was, like many people, trying to defend the status quo. And I was talking about excessive advisor and service provider compensation. He said that everybody has to make a living. Oh, I'm sorry. And I said, yes, everybody is entitled to make a living. But in order to say that, you actually have to be living.
Exactly. Right. Everybody's entitled to get paid for the work that they do, but they also have to do the work they're getting paid for.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I thought it was the make a living was a particularly interesting phrase, because that was a great segue into me saying, giving an example of the debt advisor saying, well, even if you don't do any work to make a living, at least concede you have to be living. Can you give me that much, please? And I think he understood.
So you had the facts in front of you of what was actually being paid. And yet the business owner was under the impression, I'm not paying anything, when nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, technically it was true at the employer level. That's true. The business isn't paying anything. It's the participants who are paying. So when the business owner says, I'm not paying anything, and the majority of the money is the business owners, and because the fees are passed down in proportion to the account balances, then of course that is factually incorrect. So for example, if 70% of the money is yours, that means 70% of the fees, whatever the fees are being paid by you.
And you had mentioned in our pre-chat, because you began to cover this information, which I had never heard of, so I was just blown away, that the money is being paid, the fees are being paid by the participant, and as you just said, the majority of that money is the owner's money, as it typically is, in these retirement plans. And because of the way it's being paid, it's also not tax deductible.
Yes, that's exactly right. And even if it were tax deductible, I don't know which is worse, the fact that it's not even tax deductible, or if it was tax deductible, people wouldn't even know to deduct what they've never seen because there's no invoice being sent. There's one exception for a small portion of the fees, which are known as administration. Occasionally those fees are invoiced, but the primary fees, being the record keeping and the advisory fees, are not invoiced. So you wouldn't even be able to deduct fees that you never saw in the first place, but they're not. However, had the fees been paid at the employer level, and in almost all cases for any kind of medical practice, it makes so much more sense to pay the fees at the employer level, because almost all the money is the chiropractors or the dentist or the doctor's money anyway, meaning they're paying the majority of the fees with non-tax deductible dollars, whereas if they would have paid at the employer level, they would have gotten the tax deduction, they would have scrutinized the bill much more, and they could have used the plan as a more valuable recruiting tool for the other employees who are participating, where they would have been able to eliminate a lifetime of fees, which adds up in many cases to tens of thousands of dollars should you have stayed in the plan for a long time.
Unbelievable. So is it possible to restructure it so that those fees are a business expense?
Yes, and literally all you have to do is ask. If nothing else, it makes sense to ask just to see what you're actually being billed at the participant level. Yes, there are fee disclosure statements. They're known as 408B2 at the employer level and 404A5 at the participant level. But a lot of people, A, don't even know that these documents exist. B, don't even know where to get them, even if they did know that they existed. And C, even if they find these documents, the fees are not often disclosed in a way that actually make any sense and tie to the fees as they come out of the accounts. In many cases, they're disclosed as percentages rather than in dollars, which is really pretty meaningless.
So if it's percentages instead of dollars, if an account is $10 or an account is $100 or account is $100,000, the fee is not the same. The fee is a percentage of that amount?
Yes. And when you see a percentage, and I'll add something to this, people just view percentages differently. I mean, even if you see a 1% fee, it just seems like such a small fee. And I'll give an example of a client I had years ago that was paying had $1.1 million in his account. He only had 4 people in the plan, and the advisor was getting paid 1%. And I quoted him a fee of $2,500 a year for my time and my services. Mm-hmm. And again, this was a fee that he eventually did agree to and paid at the employer level. Again, tax deductible versus non-tax deductible at the participant level. But what was really striking is that what's 1% of 1.1 million? The math really confused him. Now, that would be $11,000. And he had about 70% of the balance. So what's 11 times 7? 77. So we can do the math. That means he was personally paying $7,700 to an advisor who wasn't even using, with non-tax deductible dollars, and about $11,000 in total when you include the fees paid by all the other participants. And he said to me, $2,500 is a lot of money. I'm only paying 1% because that was almost a parody. Like, I mean, my jaw dropped, but he articulated how people look at fees. And he was more extreme because, when I spelled it out for him and he still couldn't figure it out, that was a little bit shocking. But that shows how people view percentages versus dollars, and even tiny dollar amounts. Like, what if you get charged for an extra appetizer at a restaurant and you look at the bill? I don't care how much money you have. Nobody likes to get charged for something they don't use. Now, this isn't quite the same thing, but again, when you get a bill, even tiny dollar amounts are scrutinized versus a large amount that's a percentage. It doesn't get scrutinized at all.
Sure. Wow. In fact, that would be interesting if restaurants would simply put, your appetizers were 2% of your total bill. 2%, no big deal.
Yeah, it might look a lot better. Sure. That's a great point.
That's amazing. So, you also said something else in the in our pre-chat that I want to mention. Very often you look at these fees, and so for example, you said in this example you gave, it was 1% of the fees. So you mentioned that those fees are not truly fixed.
No, I mean, all fees eventually go up, and nothing can be a fixed dollar fee like completely forever. But it really depends on the arrangement. I'll give a couple of examples. A plan provider of record keeping and administration services, and they work with a custodian that does charge a small percentage of 0.08% of the assets for the custodial services. This company is called Employee Fiduciary. And since I can remember when I first learned about them back around 2012 or so, their fees have been $1,500 per year, plus $30 for each additional participant above 30 participants, not including non-recurring fees, such as something called cross-testing, when you disproportionately allocate the profit sharing contribution to the highly compensated employees, and other non-recurring charges, or that could be recurring. That's an extra charge if you use it, like plan amendments every few years, and that's just a few $100s. And they actually had to raise their fee from 0.06 to 0.08% just to comply with the 2012 fee disclosure requirements, which is crazy because their fees, $1,500 a year plus 0.06%, were clearly stated right on their website. And they used to waive the 0.06% fee for plans below $1 million. But in order to have to comply with all these burdensome requirements to produce a document that nobody looks at, knows about, or understands when the fees were already on their website, they actually had to forego the waiving of their charge and increase from 0.06 to 0.08. I mean, that's government regulations for you.
Exactly. Well, yeah, let's not even begin to talk about government regulations, because that's a whole nother topic.
Exactly.
So as we continue to dig in and look at this more closely, so what would you say the most important questions for a business owner to ask their financial advisor, before they're setting up a company's retirement plan?
Well, and I've harped on this a lot, you always want to know exactly what everything costs, like down to the penny. I want an accounting. Don't give me percentages. Like, what am I going to pay? And what I also really like about Employee Fiduciary, which I should tell your audience, I have no financial relationship with. I have no financial incentive to promote them. They don't give me any money for referring, but happy to do so if it's a fit, is they have no restrictions on their investments. A lot of the big providers often have their own proprietary mutual funds as well.
Right.
And that can cause conflicts of interest because you might get different pricing depending on if you use their funds. And again, it's not the end of the world. You just have to be careful to make sure you don't misunderstand how the compensation arrangements work. And in some cases, like, you might get real good service, but you might be restricted to only using their funds based in order to get that pricing. Or for smaller plans, you might not have what you would call a full open architecture platform. But with employee fiduciary, you can have pretty much any fund you want in terms of funds that are added as a list of funds available for participants. There's over 10,000 different choices. That's not to say participants should always have to pick from that many choices. You as the employer, or with the help of an advisor, and that is one legitimate reason to use an advisor, is that the advisor can help whittle down which choices are available to the plan participants. They couldn't theoretically monitor them, and they can create what's known as risk-based models, like, conservative, moderate, aggressive, and those models can be automatically rebalanced at no additional cost on a quarterly basis by pretty much any record keeper, including employee fiduciary. So it's really nice to have that flexibility, along with what's called payroll integration. They didn't always have this service. It's pretty common amongst these big national providers where there's a seamless integration between the record-keeping services and your payroll company, just to make the plan administration easy.
Got it. So you've said multiple times the term employee fiduciary. So, and again, the world of finance is not my expertise. I know fiduciary means a very, very specific legal term where the advisor has actually, I don't even want to guess. Tell me exactly what a fiduciary is.
Yeah, and there's been a whole debate on what the definition is, actually. I would not get a false sense of security or it gives a false sense of security. I would not try to give a sense of security or an excessive sense of security, I should say, simply because an advisor, and I am one too, I act as a certain type of fiduciary, what's known as a Section 321 fiduciary. And what that means is I share in the fiduciary responsibility of selecting and monitoring the plan assets. There's another type of fiduciary, also called a 338 fiduciary, that actually takes discretionary control over the selection and monitoring of the plan assets. But at the end of the day, if you're a business owner and you run a chiropractic practice or any kind of business, you always retain fiduciary liability because you're always having liability for the decisions you made to hire a service provider. And that's not good to have help, but don't think you avoid all of it.
Right. That was the question that I was trying to get to. So a fiduciary has a responsibility to make sure they're making the best decisions for the person whose money it is the simplest understanding that I have. Is that correct?
Yes. And I mean, legally it gets a little more complicated. And I'm not an attorney. You always have to be acting in the best interest of the plan participants. However, I have criticize the definition of a fiduciary because you could be charging an asset-based fee, like 1% of the account, and still theoretically be a fiduciary. But the very notion of charging based on a percentage instead of a fixed dollar fee, and not suggesting to the employer, or insisting, I should say, that they pay the fees instead of the participants, since, again, in many cases, the business owner has most of the money anyway.
Right.
Seem to be a blatant violation of fiduciary duty, yet it still falls within the purview of acting in a fiduciary capacity. That's where it really gets confusing, where you could do something that's totally not in the interest of the participants, but still theoretically acting as a fiduciary.
That was part of my question. So thank you for covering that. The other part of the question is, as the employer, does the employer have a fiduciary responsibility to their employees?
Well, yes, acting in the best interest of the plan participants very much falls under fiduciary duty. And the Department of Labor has actually just put out some new guidelines letting people know they're going to be enforcing violations of loyalty. There's prudence and there's other legal terms called loyalty. And if you make decisions basically that are not in the participant's best interest, it looks to me as though these decisions are going to be more strictly enforced. And as an example, I have a spreadsheet of about 1,300 examples that it's taken me 17 years to compile just throughout the Chicago area alone, many of which are medical practices. In fact, that's the most common area of an industry where participants are being charged excessive fees. And I have documented all the way back to 2009 all the escalating service charges while the number of participants remains the same. And that's what drives the amount of work to do, which clearly shows that there's a violation of fiduciary duty, not only because the fees have become extremely excessive, but because they have also increased drastically without a requirement for an increase in services, and because the fees are primarily being paid by participants in many cases where the business owner has most of the money, and that doesn't make any financial sense.
No, not at all. So going back to the fiduciary side, and you had told me again before we started the recording that you've been in some very high level conversations, with certain aspects of the government. That they are going to start enforcing this to a greater level with new legislation. So does the practice owner face potential legal issues because they're not following the rules properly?
Yes, and they could even be personally liable if they don't comply with a specific requirement called 404C. And I won't go into the minutia, but that requirement helps at least somewhat shield the business owner from personal liability. Yes, and to the extent that the Department of Labor is able to engage in more targeted enforcement activities, all the more reason to scrutinize these charges a lot more, if nothing else, just for yourself, because it's just a really bad deal.
Right. Right. It's bad enough the employees are getting taken advantage of, it appears, but the fact that you're getting taken advantage of as the practice owner also just seems doubly unfair.
Yes.
And time is beginning to run out on us. So what's the best way for a practice owner, for a doctor to protect themselves, and what are the steps that they should take to look into this?
You could request this 408B2 fee disclosure requirement, but the simplest answer is contact your service provider, whatever person that you know of or whatever company you know of that's overseeing the plan, and demand an accounting of all fees for each service that you're getting in actual dollars, at least for the last 3 years, assuming your plan's been around that long or that you've been with the service providers that long. There's really no other way to do it than to see a summary in actual dollars. Or you can look at your own tax forms that you probably have a copy of, or you can look up your own plan online. You literally just go to efast.dol.gov/5500 search. efast.dol.gov/5500 search. Type in the name of your company, and all your tax forms will come up electronically.
Wow. You make it seem so simple. I can't imagine how many people, actually do that. And I'm sure it's very few.
I'm sure it is. It's
Sadly.
Also very people, I just want to add this real quick, that know to get rid of the advisor that they're not using and stop paying them. And all you have to do is contact your record keeper saying, I see my advisor's getting paid. Please make sure this advisor doesn't get paid anymore. And you can also, if you don't want to switch providers to the company I mentioned, you can always ask the record keeper for a fee reduction. And again, without an invoice and without knowing you're even getting billed, you don't know to ask, but you can definitely do that. And all you have to do is ask.
Right. And we had touched on this earlier in the episode. So those fees are not truly fixed; they are negotiable.
Yes, and that's kind of okay. So to answer your question, and maybe that's what you were getting at. Well, if it's a fixed fee arrangement, they're not negotiable because they're already so low, and it's a clearly stated fee per person. But if you're getting charged based on a percentage of assets, and of course the fee is clearly not fixed because it's going to be a percentage, and that the percentage might decline at certain points, but it may not be stated that way. But a lot of people don't know to even ask. So as the account goes up, even if the percentage declines, your fees are going to go up in absolute dollars. And you can absolutely, in most cases, they'll say yes, ask for a lower percentage, because so few people know to do that. And they know you're serious enough to probably leave them if you know enough to ask. And for that reason, they usually say yes.
Wow. That's unbelievable. Paul, this has just been amazing. And I've learned a ton, and I can't thank you enough, as I always say, for, spending your time, sharing your knowledge, and helping the chiropractic profession, to grow and prosper. I genuinely appreciate it. If someone has a specific question, could they reach out to you personally, or you'd prefer to not get involved in that?
Yes, absolutely. You can find lots of information about me on my website, Paul Sippil, PaulSippil.com. Type my name into YouTube. I am very easy to find, and there's lots of articles I've written right on my blog, which is right on my website. You'll find it right there very easily.
Paul, as I said before, I can't thank you enough. This has just been amazing. And really, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your time, your knowledge, and your wisdom.
You are welcome. It was great to be here. I really enjoyed our conversation.
All right. And that's our show for today. If you have a question about today's show or your own practice, feel free to reach out at fortheloveofchiropractic.com. Before making changes to your practice, be sure to seek legal advice regarding those changes and regulations in your state. For the Love of Chiropractic is an RGF production, all rights reserved. And thanks for listening. Original music provided by Hunter Rich Music.